Welcome to the EPC. It's a strange situation. I think all of you are aware that there have been a number of attacks which have been going on. We are not clear at the moment exactly what has happened. There are at least now 3 confirmed attacks with some casualties, but we will see exactly what has happened. It's has changed a bit the setting for this discussion, but we decided that given the time when we heard about the attacks this morning, that we would go ahead and then give you the chance to have the discussion with the speakers who are already here. Jilde Kakove has now cancelled this morning for obvious reasons, but we will go ahead with a more informal discussion. I think there's very little we can say at the moment on the attacks themselves, only to say that it clearly shows that the concerns around radicalisation are very concrete and topical concerns which will need to be addressed. So I think it's an important project for us, and we're glad that we're carrying out this project together with the European Foundation for Democracy and the Counter-Extremism project. And we're very glad that we have the chance to do this. I think we have very good speakers for this first event in the series, and I would just want to welcome them, and I'm glad that you managed to come in yesterday rather than today. So it's the radicalisation, jihadism is of course a big challenge to our personal security, but also to the European project. I think what is already clear is that these attacks are European attacks. They're not aimed just at Belgium, they're aimed much further. And I think the symbolism of attacking the European quarter and the airport gives a clear message. So I think it is more than ever important to have these discussions, and I'm glad that we can do this. And welcome to this first event of the series. And I'll just hand over to Roberta Bonazzi, the Executive Director of the European Foundation for Democracy. Also say welcome.
Fabian, thank you very much. Clearly, the opening event or opening policy dialogue of this series is more timely than ever. For us, the European Foundation for Democracy is actually a privilege and a very important opportunity to be able to work with the EPC, the Counter-Extremist project in the US that launched in Brussels about 6 months ago. And last but not least, ISPI, the Milan-based Institute for International Political Studies, who's also contributing in terms of expertise. For the last 10-11 years, European Foundation for Democracy has been focusing on these issues. On the panel of experts, we have some current and former colleagues, experts who for a long time have studied, researched, and briefed as well as warned policymakers, both in Europe and worldwide, on the phenomenon of jihadism, the phenomenon of radicalisation, and how this could not be isolated to one specific region. And it's in the tragedy that we're witnessing today, this morning, it's I don't know exactly how to qualify, but last night we were probably all reading the news about the explosion and the attack in Bamako, where a center for European military trainers was under attack, was attacked by Islamist militants. So as if we needed an additional confirmation of how global this threat is. The purpose of this series, of this program, is really to examine, to bring different experts and examine the phenomenon from all its different angles. And it will starting today, will continue until the rest of the year. I would like to hand over to Amanda, and I think we can start with the real substance of this briefing.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. So I just repeat what you both said. I think the topic of today's meeting is more important than ever before, defining the phenomena of jihadist radicalisation, drivers and catalysts. I mean, if you look how many terrorist attacks have taken place over the last few months, I mean, the tragedy today, but a few days ago in Istanbul, you know, in less than 1 week before that in Ankara, then going back to Paris, there's, you know, a systematic series now of these sort of ugly attacks that are clearly aimed at for many different reasons. So I think today's discussion is very topical and important, and we're fortunate to have 3 real experts on the area that have come here today to speak about it. So I'm going to briefly introduce them. First of all, we have Rashad Ali, who's head of strategy at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. He's a well-known counter-terrorism practitioner and trainer. He's also been an external lecturer at Derby University on radicalisation and terrorism. So basically his whole, if I could say, career has been focused on this really important topic. And he's just here in the middle. I'm in a bit of a strange position because normally I should sit in the middle, but I'm at the side. Then Alexander Ritzman, who is here to my right, Senior Research Fellow at Brandenburg Institute for Security and Society. He's also spent many years focused on this topic of counter-terrorism, the ideology behind it, etc. And last but not least, Bakary Sambe, Senior Fellow at the European Foundation for Democracy. So I'm going to ask Rashad to kick us off, please.
I think given the kind of events that we're experiencing today, it's probably a much more somber mood to approach some of these discussions. Everyone's mentioned how relevant they are and how pertinent it is to start talking about some of the issues surrounding this, and I think we have actually been discussing this for some time. I think what's different right now is probably the nature of the challenges that we face. The nature of the challenges that we face are different in a number of ways. I think it's becoming more and more clear that Brussels and Europe is actually the front line almost of the interaction between a global terrorist project which has very deep-rooted political objectives which are becoming more and more manifest, and therefore I guess our response internationally, internally and on a practitioner level is really, really fundamental, that we sit back and we think about how do we proceed forward from here. You know, the introduction explained that actually we're not just dealing with terrorism here in Brussels, we're dealing with a singular phenomenon that is unique in that the terrorism that took place in Istanbul was orchestrated arguably by people who have been involved in orchestrating terrorism here in Brussels, which we know the individuals involved connected with the recent arrest with Saleh Abdeslam that on a logistical level were involved in the terrorism and the terrorist acts in Paris. We know this from the intelligence that was gathered. We know this from the types of information that individuals who have met with these people have reported. So as an example, we know that their phones, they were in contact with people here, right here in Brussels, from Paris. We know as an example that the people who helped them locate their, with their passports, with their how to travel, etc., were people from Brussels. We know that allegedly there were 90 individuals that came across through the immigrants that have been associated with ISIS and ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So that phenomena is a single phenomena that has various manifestations. Those manifestations included what happened in Tunis, they include what happens in Iraq today, and it includes, you know, the situation that we're in. So the first thing, I think, if we step back in terms of defining this, we have to be very clear on two very different things. There's a tactic of terrorism that is undertaken, and that tactic doesn't happen outside of a political context. They want to achieve certain aims. So I'm sure we can discuss what those aims are in a lot more detail. The second thing is the motives and the motivation, because people are now having discussions which I think sometimes are becoming slightly absurd. They're so divorced from reality. That is the motivation of an individual. Is it to do with their individual psychological makeup? Is it to do with the grievances they have in foreign policy? Is it the fact they don't fit into Belgian society or European society? Probably this isn't the best time for me to say this because of the situation we're in, but these discussions are absurd. They're absurd not to say that identity and belonging does not play a role. Of course it plays a role. They're absurd not because the perception of foreign policy and grievances does not play a role. Of course it plays a role. But the idea that we can detach any of those things from the very, very clear ideological dimension, an ideological dimension that looks and has created an us and them narrative very, very clearly, whether it's the Europeans against the Islamists, the West against the Islamists, the kuffar, the unbelievers against the Islamists, or whether it's in a very clear, pristine, pro-Islamist ideology, i.e. they don't just stand against democracy, they don't just stand against liberal values, they don't just stand against organising society via the nation state. They're not just against international institutions, whether it's international law, borders, treaties and so on. They have an entirely different ideological perspective on how to organise society in the world around them. That ranges from how do they organise their citizens or the people within their countries in classifying them as Muslims, heretics, non-Muslims, as people who are going to be subject to the jizya, as subservient and subjects to their authority, whether it's in defining that actually Iraq and Syria don't exist, there is no border there as much as we may like to call it a border. In reality, this is one state that's going to encompass the entirety of the Muslim majority countries, because that's their world view. It's a pre-modern worldview which doesn't accept the nation state, which doesn't accept actually all of our achievements in modernity, whether that's the rule of law, whether that's the idea of liberty, whether that's the value that we give to international cooperation and treaties, that what we've learnt over the last 5 centuries in terms of being able to maintain peace. And actually this couples in with a lot of the other things that are happening. You know, the idea, I mean, I've just come from London, and I have to tell you, it's disturbing in London when we do seem to be having a majority feeling of the Brexit camp. That's the truth of it. It appears to be the case that if not the majority, that it's very 50-50 split. And actually what that represents is more than just parochial Englanders leaving Europe. It represents something much more detailed than that, which is happening at the same time as Putin is undertaking not only his acts in Syria, alongside the Iranian regime, which is decimating the people of Syria, and sending millions of people within Europe to also do something very, very clear, very, very specific, to change the makeup of Europe, to destroy the European project, to bring an end to the idea that we can come together to stop war and to stop the persecution within countries. But actually, that project and that ideal is being attacked. So when looked at in that context, we have to step back and think about this in the broad context then, which means, first of all, we do not compromise our values and our views and our principles, which means what? Which means we saw a number of reactions post 9/11, post 7/7, some of which sought to compromise our conceptions of habeas corpus, our conceptions of the rule of law, our conceptions of maintaining innocence before evidence, our conceptions of making sure that we act by international law standards. Because remember, everything is aimed at undermining those standards, which means we need to reinforce that value system, which means at the same level, on individually we're reinforcing the notion of liberty. reinforcing the notion of democracy and reinforcing the notions of the rule of law, which means as a values perspective, those things become uncompromisable, irrelevant of every other factor. So irrelevant of what people's alleged grievances may be, what people's alleged identity issues and politics may be, it means we need to stand for something, to say, hold on a second, Europe stands for these values, that's why we're united together, and those values form what bring us together. It's what unites people of different backgrounds, different countries, different cultures, but fundamentally recognizing those things. And I think that means that on a policy level, we do a number of things. We don't engage with extremists in order to try and stop terrorism. This has been one of the policy actions that has been undertaken in various countries. Fundamentally, this is ideological suicide. And we need to be very, very clear about that. At the same time, that doesn't mean in any way marking all people of a certain ethnicity, all people of a certain religious persuasion with a singular brush. We know there's no such thing as a singular Muslim praxis. Muslims don't share a single identity, neither ethnically, politically, religiously, in sectarian levels. There's a saying, if you get 3 Jews together, or 2 Jews together, you'll get 3 opinions. Get several Muslims together and ask them to talk about anything. They're as diverse, as pluralistic internally as any other culture or any other mass civilization. So yes, we can recognize that. We interact with people on the basis of their own identity. We don't label them Muslims and interact with them as a Muslim bloc. In the same way, we don't see this as a singular Islamist bloc. I think those things are my initial kind of thoughts and reactions. And I may have probably spoken for too long, so I hope some of the others will be able to enlighten us more on some of the other points of discussion here.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I move on, I'd like to ask you a question. I mean, you're coming from the UK. Perhaps you could say something about the UK, experience. I mean, what are the main challenges now that are faced in the UK? I mean, a lot of people, including actually my own brother this morning, talk about, the Sharia law that is, allowed in some, let's say, regional or municipalities in the UK, playing into part of this problem or the challenge. I mean, do you agree with that? I mean, or is there, what are the key problematic areas?
I think you were originally going to have Ilham Mania, I think, speak today, and that's her area of expertise. She's got a whole research area and project on this. So her book is published, and I think it's probably worth everybody having a look and reading that. I think the problem is that people, again, they're speaking on different levels. So some people will tell you British law very clearly does not allow parallel courts to be established. This is true. British law does not allow that. And so the only way that people establish these councils by which they can engage in arbitration and dispute resolution by Sharia rules is allegedly according to the Arbitration Act, which allows people to resolve their differences on matters outside of utilising judicial statutory legislation. Now, that's actually a misnomer, because the Act only really applies in financial matters and matters of personal dispute. It does not apply where there's statutory law. And so in all matters related to family guidance, children's rights, custody, these issues are precluded from any remit that any council can have. And so anything has to happen under the jurisdiction of the family court. So anything that is operating outside of that sphere is effectively operating outside of the legal bounds. And the problem with many of these councils is they operate in that sphere. And so those things need to be very, very clearly restricted, stopped, and brought under the control of the family courts. There's no two ways about that. In terms of other matters such as religious divorces, etc., in the UK we have a history. So to give an example, again, back in the 90s, the Beth Din, which is a halakhic council for Jewish communities, they decided very clearly, and was reissued by the chief rabbi recently, actually in the last month, that they will not be granting decree nisi divorces to individuals which hold women over a barrel. If they're saying we're not going to divorce you because we don't wish to do so, we're not going to grant a religious get, actually that can't happen anymore, because that will stop them from being granted a decree nisi by the courts. So the courts have intervened to determine actually that that level of repression doesn't take place. So we have a disparity here within the Sharia councils are run by Muslims that don't actually work in that space. So I think there are some very serious issues that need to be addressed in that regard, and certain regulation that needs to take place. But at the same time, there's a danger again of being reactionary. And that reactionary level is thinking that we can solve this by legislation. We can't solve this by legislation because this is a cultural problem. It's actually a problem of individuals, women who believe that they are bound by certain regulations that stop them from being able to enact their own kind of proclivities and their liberties. And what we need to address is that very specific cultural problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to Mr. Ritzman. I mean, we talked about very briefly about the whole ideology behind this terrorism. I mean, most recently this has been linked to ISIS ideology that has been, sold through, social media, etc., which seems to have had a considerable impact in, let's say, the radicalisation process of quite a lot of people, particularly youth in Europe. I mean, youth that didn't actually have anything to do with Islam to a large extent before this process. So maybe you can touch on this issue among others.
Yes, thank you very much. That's the part I prepared, narrative, propaganda, counter-radicalization issues. I would like to give a couple of remarks before that, obviously. I'm working with the Brandenburg Institute for Security and Society, as you know. I've been working with EFD for 10 years on issues like this. I started working on radical Islam, political Islam, 2001, like a lot of people, as a full-time job, basically, in different capacities, as a legislator, as a policy advisor, as a researcher, as in different roles. Right now I'm very tense. I don't know how you feel. I'm still, like, my blood pressure is up, and I know this feeling. It happens sometimes, combined with big attacks. 2001 was an attack like that, where we didn't know anything. At least most people didn't know about Al-Qaeda a lot. They didn't understand why these guys were coming after us, what their objective was, what we were supposed to do. Now, 15 years later, I'm really wondering, what's the learning curve? Like, what have we understood? How are we reacting? And it is amazing to me that we still seem not to understand that terrorism is a tactic. It's something you do to achieve something. They're not ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Boko Haram. They're not killing people just to kill people. They do this for a specific, they want a reaction from us or from people who have to deal with these terrible crimes. So in the ideology now, talking about ISIS, because this might be the context also in Brussels today, ISIS says there's a big problem in the Muslim Ummah, in the community of Muslims. There is very few that really understand what Islam is. That is the ISIS group, of course, from the perspective of ISIS. And then there's opponents of ISIS, the ones who totally disagree and fight them. But in the middle is this huge group that is confused, ignorant, Muslims who don't know what they really should do. This is the perspective of ISIS. The gray in the middle. They say there's black and white. You're either with us or against us. But in reality, there's a lot of gray. And they want to reduce this gray. They want to push Muslims towards extremism. And the strategy they have is to commit attacks in Europe and other places for European institutions, Americans, everybody who is involved, to overreact in a way to push Muslims out of society so they can be easily recruited by ISIS and others who then say, see, we told you. They are racist, they're bigots, they're overreacting, they're arresting everyone. And this is super tricky, of course, right? This is very complicated, but we have to understand if we agree with it or not, if we think this is logical or not. This is not the point. We first have to understand why they do what they do. And then we can reflect on how to counter this. And now, France published a report recently about the attacks in France, 55 pages, and a senior French counterterrorism expert is being quoted saying that we don't talk to the Belgians on an intelligence level. We don't even agree on how we translate Arabic names. Because in European languages, we have 15 kinds of translating a name coming from Arabic. So if you don't agree on the translation of the name and you have a database, you might run into problems because it might be the same person registered under different names in different databases. So before we now come again into the discussion of cutting down civil liberties, going after all kinds of people, we have to look inwards and find out why we're still so bad, obviously, on intelligence cooperation. How is it possible that a network of individuals in Brussels and partially France can operate without being discovered over years and commit a series of attacks, then pull back, and then commit again a series of attacks? This is like the key purpose why we have intelligence agencies and police, and I'm really kind of shocked, despite the fact of having worked 15 years on this issue, that we're still not capable of doing this, because a network should be easily discovered, right? There's a lot of people involved, there's a lot of communication, there's traveling, you need to forge passports, you need to buy things for explosives, you need to travel, all these things. So we really have to first check the capabilities of our security agencies, the openness for cooperation, and everything that's in the way of cooperation has to be challenged. And before we now come up with new laws and try to cut down on civil liberties, that's just my call I would like to give. And I would like to make. The second thing ISIS wants, of course, is to lure us into battle. They fantasize about a final battle in an area in Syria called Dabiq. Because in some of the prophecies and foreseeings in ancient history and in Islam, there's a final battle of the true Muslims against unbelievers and crusaders and everybody else. So they want us to come. They're very upset that the Americans are not coming. They publish this, they talk about it. They want to fight American ground troops in Syria because they know that their recruitment will spike up 10 times. And this is what they're actually looking for, though. They want overreactions by European and Western societies towards Muslims in Europe and the US, for example, and they want our military to come in. So it is very tricky because some of these things, there has to be a military answer. There is a military answer. This can be discussed if this is the right way to go. But I'm just highlighting that it has to be part of the learning curve that we know what they say they want to achieve. It's not like bad weather that comes over us. It's not thunder. It's a strategy, tactics, ideology, structure. It's an organization that is coming. So we can deal with them. We just have to be smarter. Now, narratives and propaganda. Why do so many European youth, for example, I would focus on European youth, join an organization like ISIS or believe in an ideology, a narrative of a group like ISIS? It is very tricky also how to counter this, so I try to talk about both of these things. So far, ISIS is investing a lot of money and manpower into producing state-of-the-art video clips in full HD, movie theater quality, with references to computer games, to action movies, to try to connect to a culture, a youth culture that is already there. So they're not coming up with something totally new. They try to connect to existing parts of youth culture. And there are a lot of initiatives in different countries that try to deal with this, to counter it, to discredit it, to make fun of it. Some are government-driven, some are NGOs, some are individuals. But if we compare how we as Western societies react to ISIS, the investment we do on countering their narratives is ridiculously low. So we do something on military, we do something on intelligence, obviously also not very good. But the thing that we dealing with their ideology, as Rashad also said, is really something we have to get better fast, because right now we're losing. There's no conclusive counter-narrative or alternative narrative, and I'll try to highlight a few ways how we could approach this and maybe make it a little more practical. Based on two assumptions. If we look back in history of counter-propaganda, counter-narratives usually connect with people if they're very close to the truth, if they're based on truth. So we cannot come up with some crazy idea. It has to be based on truth, and the messenger, of course, is as important as the message. So it makes a difference. If I talk to a group of people, or if Rashad groups, usually people accept content of or messages if they see themselves in the messenger in a way. So the more similar the messenger is to the objective of the message, to the person that should receive the message, the more likely is that they accept it and think about it at least. ISIS propaganda has it has a lot of messages, but for me the key 4 points are: Sunni Muslims are being killed, okay, in Syria and Iraq. They're being killed in the hundreds of thousands by the Assad regime, by Iranian militias, and of course by Iraqi Shia militias or in Shia army. So it's basically the Shia-Sunni conflict that is being communicated. Sunni Muslims are being under attack. Children and women are being killed, and there are pictures and videos of dead, brutally murdered children and women, and they say, and you are a Muslim, why are you not helping? You have to come. And then they show videos of 16-year-olds with Kalashnikovs, and they say, see, even a 16-year-old can help. Why are you not helping? This is one key message. The other is that they say we have established a caliphate, a religious superstate. It's humane, it's just, it's social, and it's your duty to come. Because it is a caliphate, it's the only place for you as a Muslim to live in. You cannot be somewhere else, you have to come. So this is another call. The third one is what they offer in a more concrete way is a new life. If you're unhappy with your life so far, if it's like mediocre, even if you're kind of well off but you're bored, you get an upgrade. They say you can be a hero. You can be a part of a brotherhood. Your life will make sense. You will fight for a just cause, right? And then adventure, of course, action, and sex. We cannot underestimate, because ISIS is highlighting it, that you will have access to women. You can marry several of them. You will have sex slaves, for Europeans mostly. So this is what they offer. They say Sunni Islam is under attack. We have a caliphate, you have to come. You will get a new life and an upgrade. And there's an adventure, and you get all kinds of benefits. In addition, actually, because they want people to come, they say, we even have Nutella. You know Nutella, right? The spread for your bread, to imply normality. You can move from Brussels or Berlin or from London to Raqqa, and it's not going to be a big difference. It's just going to be much cooler and nicer, and you're going to be happy here. This is their message that they're sending to youth. Now, the role of Islam. Tricky subject. ISIS says we are all about Islam. They try to establish a direct line from the Quran, from the Hadith, the deeds and sayings of the Prophet, to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, their so-called caliph. They say this is one line, and in between there are other authorities, but we are the true Islam. There's no discussion about it. We are Islam. And they don't mind that, beginning from Al-Qaeda. That's also interesting. Al-Qaeda says ISIS is not really Islamic. They're just a bunch of angry young men. They don't understand anything. They're too radical. So beginning from Al-Qaeda, who says they're not really Islamic, to the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, to Al-Azhar in Egypt, to every moderate Islamic association in the world who says this is of course not Islam, but they say it is, right? So I don't think that the answer can be this has nothing to do with Islam. This would be limiting us too far, but of course it's not the Islam that is being practiced by 99% of the world of Muslims, right? But there is an issue, and I think the issue is that they take this foundation of the religion because they justify everything they do, everything with a Quranic verse or something the Prophet did, and say, see, this is what the scripture says, and we do this because of that. So they manipulate it, they use it, and they make a political ideology out of it. And this is what my colleague already said. This makes it part of their weapons arsenal and ideology to brainwash people, to justify actions, to justify their objectives. It is complicated, religion plays a role, but of course it's not the general Islam. It is a tiny, tiny, tiny subgroup, but they say they do it in the name of Islam, so we have to recognize this and deal with it. We cannot simply say Islam is not the issue at all. Now, the videos, the propaganda you see from ISIS through media is all bad news, right? Executions, kidnappings, terrible things. Interesting is that 50% of their propaganda is promoting funny things, not funny things, fun things, happy things, going fishing with the brothers, taking a stroll in the desert, grilling meat with the brothers, going swimming with the brothers, promoting a happy life in addition to the Nutella thing. They really try to say, there's no problem, you can come to our caliphate, it's fly to Turkey, it's no big deal, you're going to be happy here. So we have to understand, people who go there do not just go because of the terrible execution videos, but because of the part of the propaganda we often miss that focuses on the happy life in ISIS land. Now the people that go, there have been research has been done online mostly, a couple of interviews. Why do people go? 3 groups have been identified: the seekers, those who seek attention, seek adventure, and seek easy accessible sex. This seems to be one group. They're just bored, they want an upgrade, they might have been petty criminals, they could also be students of architecture. It doesn't really matter. They have everything. Everything is in this group. Then you have the protectors, the ones who mostly focus on their Sunni Muslims being killed. You have to help. You have to come and protect them, you have to save them. And these people mostly go to protect Sunni Muslims or to avenge their death. The third group, and this is something very important, are just followers who follow a strong alpha in the group. Not everyone has an ideology, not everyone has a real objective. A lot of people live in groups. There's a network of friends. It's not that we have in every town in Europe an average amount of people who go to ISIS. It's clusters. It's Vilvoorde, for example, right? It's maybe Molenbeek. It's parts in Berlin. It's other small towns. It's about people who motivate people to actually go. So you can radicalize yourself over the web, but very few people leave actually and go to ISIS land without having actually met someone in between. Women, why would women go? Right? This is a question I also asked myself a while ago. Why could this be attractive? Now, the sales pitch of ISIS is that here you will find a just man, a pious man, a real man, and not these materialistic sellouts that live in the West. So if you want a real Muslim man, you can only find them in the caliphate. And for some women who are suffering from the patriarchic structure, maybe also in Europe, yeah, they are not allowed to go out after 6 in the evening. They can only go with a brother accompanying them. For them, going to the caliphate is being seen, at least it's promoted like this, as a liberation, because in the caliphate also the males have to oblige and have to follow the strict rules. So no sex before marriage is for both. It's not like in Europe that the guys often do what they want and the sisters are under control of their fathers, or it's a small group I'm talking about, but that's part of their narrative. You find real men and everybody is treated equally. It's a just society. There's no double standards if you accept that Sharia is one standard, which is a different discussion. So how do we deal with this? You can come up with funny videos making fun of ISIS. You can say, no, this is not Islam, and you can quote scripture, and all this is being done. I think it's not being done in the best way so far. What seems to be effective is that former supporters of ISIS, defectors, and also victims of ISIS, family members of victims and family members of members of ISIS, speak out. They have credibility. They might be closer on a personal level to the audience that we are talking to. And there have been interviews done with defectors and former members of ISIS. And they say, we left because. ISIS is not protecting Sunnis, as they claim. They're actually killing Sunnis. They're killing other militias, they're killing civilians for whatever reasons. There's a lot of killing of Sunnis going on, and I came to protect Sunnis. So I cannot stay there. Important point. Second point, brutality. Brutality towards hostages, brutality towards civilians, and also within ISIS. They say it's too brutal. I don't get the connection. I have to, this is too much for me. Corruption. Selective benefits for people who are closer to the leadership and all seems to be an issue there as well. So it's not this just, perfect, happy society. There's a lot of corruption going on, supposedly what they said. And it's a hard life, especially for Westerners. It's not fun and exciting because you're not really on the battlefront. You're either a suicide bomber because you don't have the military training, you probably don't speak the language properly, you're not very useful. You're being used as a suicide bomber or as a guard, doing guard duty. So you're in front of a building, and that's why they're online all the time. So they tweet about what they do, or they're on Facebook. So it's boring, and there's no Nutella. Seems to be an issue that the lies that they say it's a happy life, everything's available, come here, it's not the case. Sometimes there's no warm water, sometimes there's no electricity. I'm finishing in a minute. So the point is, and there is a movement right now in the counter-narrative, counter-propaganda sphere, people who deal with this in the US and in Europe, to focus more on the stories of credible messengers, meaning former ISIS people, victims of ISIS, family members, people who have an emotional connection. And the core message is that ISIS is lying to you. So the things they promise you are not true. And so far we're not really doing this. We're saying ISIS is crazy, they're murderers just in general, they're sick, they're poor, they're in some way crazy. But this is not the point that is working. Working would be attacking the core narrative, but of course only if you're looking for information, right? So maybe a young person who's on the web wanting to learn about ISIS should find a website explaining that ISIS is lying with this ideology and not just pro-ISIS videos and some government information not to go to Syria, right? Between that, there's very little happening. So there's a big gap that should be filled. And just as a final remark, final, we have to understand that there's a root cause, or there's a reason why ISIS is so strong. And that's the disenfranchisement, the situation of Sunni tribes and families in Iraq and in Syria. That they think that dealing with ISIS and having deals with ISIS is better than having deals with the Shia Iraqi government. They are afraid of the Iranian militias. You know, there is a reason why ISIS is so much stronger than Al-Qaeda ever was, and that is they have a local conflict where the local population says, we might not like you guys, but you are better than the alternative. And this has to change. Once the local tribes, like they did in 2006 in Al-Anbar, rise up and kick those guys out, it will be much easier to go after them. So there cannot simply be a European domestic solution and not only a bombing military solution. There has to be a political solution in Iraq and parts of Syria to make sure that ISIS is being kicked out from the territory that they're holding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I agree with all of the points you made about ISIS, but I think there's another element, because ISIS doesn't exist in a vacuum. I mean, there's the element of where it gets its money from to do all of this stuff in the first place that I think needs to be more seriously addressed, and doesn't seem to be being sufficiently addressed by the West, and not only the West. And of course that brings us to Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabi agenda that Saudi Arabia has been pushing, you know, for decades. I mean, not just in this region, but far beyond. I mean, in the Far East, for example, you have countries that have been, you know, groups of, you know, radicals have increased and are brought back over here. So I think there's an issue of having a tougher approach towards Saudi Arabia, where money that, you know, okay, it's not directly from the kingdom, of course, but it's sent via, you know, different sorts of organisations of cracking down on this, which is also, I think, going to be a key element in getting rid of, ISIS, because so far our main strategy seems to have been bombing ISIS, and already for a long time, but yet it still exists. So I don't know if you could comment perhaps on the issue of the financing of the organisation, and then also, of course, what you said about Shia and Sunni is right, but you need a sort of a rapprochement between the two groups, which is absolutely not going to be easy, particularly when you have this regional power struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which doesn't seem likely to end, at least until Saudi Arabia runs out of oil, which is not for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, very important points. It's of course not just a local conflict, right? There's a local conflict, and then there's Turkey with its interest, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar played a big role, now a little back, which makes it even more complicated, even more, difficult to find solutions. But there might be some progress, but the key would be that Saudi Arabia and Iran, I guess, find some sort of agreement that they have to stop supporting militias on these sites. But Saudi Arabia constantly announces, we have nothing to do with ISIS, we don't finance them, we fight against them, we arrest them. So the official side, as you said, is not involved, they say. But of course they have been exporting radicals. They kicked out of Saudi Arabia, actually. People who challenged the rule of the king and the interpretation of the mufti were kicked out and sometimes received funding and opened mosques in the Balkan or in Europe or in other places. And some of this is related because the ideology is very similar. If you go back, and I'm not a theologist, so it is kind of a tricky topic, but there are a lot of similarities. Let's keep it there. Finances, it seems that bombing their cash depots, bombing their oil structure, gave them a significant blow. Supposedly they cut the salaries for foreign fighters for 50%. Not sure if that's true, might be true, but this is an ongoing struggle. But of course, if you hold a territory as big as Great Britain, you have income in forms of tax, right? And income you just take stuff that you like because you're kind of an occupier with some sort of deal with parts of the local population. So the guys who are not on your side, you just take their riches. But this is not sustainable. You can only steal property or gold or money once. So the financial issue is a big issue, and it's being dealt with in a military way, bombing sources of income, but I'm really not sure how the real financial structure of the Islamic, so-called Islamic State is right now. I don't see a lot of money coming from Saudi Arabia, from my knowledge.
Okay, but it's not just about financing the Islamic State. It's about finance that goes into various different, let's say, organizations throughout Europe, which are promoting extremism.
Yeah, sure.
Which, again, maybe this comes back to the question of cooperation sharing,
yeah.
But it remains a significant problem.
I think it is important, though, to kind of differentiate some of the different things we're dealing with. So as an example, the broader ideological issues, the branding of certain types of religious messages, the rise of Islamism in general, actually those types of things are quite key. And that does happen across the Saudi regime and so forth. In the UK, as an example, some of the Saudi scholarship or the Saudi preachers, Muhammad Hanifi was known to be connected with many of the young individuals who left from the United Kingdom to end up going. On the finance side, though, I'm inclined to agree. Actually, the major financial contributions have been the banks that they raided and looted, the taxes which they still do collect, and they're very, very elaborate in the way they record their taxation system and so forth. And also hostages that they have been seeking money from, and oil revenue with the Assad regime. There's a war economy that is going on there, and I think that can't be negated. But the bigger issue here really is what you mentioned at the end, I think. The bigger issue is we're dealing with a situation where ISIS are operating. If you're a Sunni and you're in this region and you're being attacked by the Assad regime, where 500,000 people have died, no one really gives a damn. Let's be straight. No one really gives a damn about the fact they're dead. Because nobody in the international community have we decided to do anything about that. We've decided to do things about other reasons. So we are attacking ISIS, which will probably be responsible for maybe 5% of that figure. But the Assad regime, which is responsible for the overriding, 490,000 dead, 300,000 missing, 11 million dispersed. And so as far as you're concerned, The Assad regime is doing it. The Iranian government is doing it. The Russians have been doing it. The Obama regime has decided, and I'm sorry if this sounds a little bit political, but the Obama regime has decided we are having detente with Iran. Iran are now our friends. It doesn't matter what's happening on the ground in Syria, because they will happily give that up. To the extent when the Syrian opposition, these are not the jihadist opposition, the Al-Qaeda opposition, who the individuals from Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been supporting financially as well, more the Al-Qaeda, Jaish al-Fatah and so on, but actually the opposition group from the FSA, the people who we've been in contact with, who we've known about for many, many, many years, actually we hear statements by John Kerry saying they need to stop whining. This is a real step. This is, you know, they need to stop whining. It's like, if you're a Sunni in that region, the only people fighting on your behalf that are successful is Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. If you're in that region, because the FSA have just been abandoned by us. They have just literally been abandoned by us. So now, who is there on the ground that's fighting on your side? And that's a much bigger issue. The narrative messaging for us in the West is much bigger. Because actually this then comes into how do we tackle it. And we haven't. We spend several million pounds, euros a day in the bombing. You know, we don't spend anything near that in terms of thinking about serious counter-messaging. You know, seriously putting effort in to say, hold on a second, we want to tackle this ideology, we want to tackle the rudimentary politics, we want to tackle the identity issues, all those, the soft power arguments. But you can't really take that seriously if what you put in, as an example in the UK, is £15 million for a counter-extremism fund. You're not being serious. No one's going to take that seriously. Actually stepping back and saying we as a society need to do something and do that very seriously is a different question. Sorry to go on.
No, it's fine. It's all really interesting. So now I'm going to turn over to our last speaker, to Bakare Sambe, who does research on Islamic movements and ideologies. As I mentioned, he is at the European Foundation for Democracy, but he's also assistant professor in research at the Department of Civilizations, Religions, Arts and Communication at the Gastonberger University of St. Louis in Senegal. So I give the floor to you, please, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I would like first to thank Roberta and the European Foundation for Democracy and our friend in EPC. So I remember 8 years ago, we were talking about this subject, about the ideology, and with Rashad, when we came here, discussing in the framework of exchanges between European network here in Brussels. And I think that people in those moments did not understand what we were talking about, and I think that many people say that in this period that we are exaggerating, we are inventing some stories. It is just people who are inventing some stories. It's not reality. And in those periods also, many organizations here in Brussels and many scholars say about, you have, they are Islamists, they are extremists, but good extremists, not terrorists. And now I would love to know what they think about the evolution of the situation in Europe and in the Middle East and in Africa. It is sure now the expression of when we talk about international community, now it is a reality. Yes, now we are an international community of vulnerable countries. There is no exception. This is not a problem of Afghanistan when the thing was very far, and we are in Europe, say that you have this problem in Afghanistan or in Syria. Now it is a real problem for all our countries. First, I would like to apologize for my very francophone English, but I will try to make it possible to. And the second remark is we are in the period of global terrorism. Yes, a global terrorism, and in this context, it is amazing. But Islam is used as a kind of ideology to fight the hegemony of and the domination of the West or the powerful countries. You know, in the 70s, you have many tools to fight the liberalism, to fight the hegemony of the powerful countries. You have communism, you have Maoism. But now, Islam is becoming little by little an ideology used by certain people to tackle the West or the liberal thought or the hegemony of the West. During research work I did for the special envoy to the Sahel from the United Nations, I visited a lot of countries, including Nigeria and northern Nigeria. I proposed to the United Nations to achieve this research by discussing with the religious actors to ask them just two questions. From their perspective, what is the problem? What is the cause of all this? And from their perspective, what is the solution? And I met the Mufti of Maiduguri in northern Nigeria, where Boko Haram is really very, very active. His name is the Sheikh Ibrahim Saleh Al-Husseini. And I asked him a question: what is the cause of all this problem, all this trouble around the world, and especially in Nigeria? He said a very interesting sentence, saying that the cause of all of this is the combination between the arrogance of the unjust and the ignorance of those people feeling themselves as victims. I have the same answer from another sheikh from Mauritania, the Sheikh Ba, who is leading a very important Quranic school in Nabaria in Mauritania. And my concern is, when people talk about terrorism now, they just focus on economical, social factors, political, and they try little by little to neglect the ideological dimension of the phenomenon. And I think that it is this conception of terrorism is part of the problem. Why? In Dakar, 2 years ago, we had a conference calling the Forum International pour la Paix et la Sécurité en Afrique, International Forum for Peace and Security in Africa. And it was many representatives from the European Union, from the United Nations. And I said something, people thought about this, and they said it's just a provocation. But I was serious. I think that the international community have at least 40 years, is 40 years late compared to the networks and the groups we want to fight now. 40 years, why? In the 17s, some countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other countries began to achieve their first Sahel strategy. And Sahel strategy is new for us. Yes, we have the European Sahel strategy, the UN Sahel strategy. What was this Sahel strategy? It was built on two conceptions. First is the dawah, preaching, and the other is iratha, is welfare. Then they use the welfare, rescuing people, to preach a new kind of Islam, and the Wahhabi and the Salafi Islam. And the project was to build a Wahhabi zone in Africa from Eritrea to Dakar. Eritrea, Sudan, and they say that the main objective is to encircle the Christian Ethiopia, and they have training centers in Chad, in northern Nigeria when Sharia began to be applied, and in Niger they have a very important university built by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, founded by Saudi Arabia, when they train many people and they led them to spreading what they call the true Islam in the Sahel region. And Mali, the northern Mali, which was controlled by Mahmoud Dicko, the same, who is now the leader of the Islamic Council in Mali. And of course, Senegal is the final objective. Senegal is really important for them because Senegal is now the only country, until this morning, the only country which is not hit by this phenomenon. And you have all the organizations, European Union, United Nations, and other, and they have also in the 70s, because in the 70s you have a series of many years of drought in the Sahel region, and in those period, European Union and the United States have no money to help us. They were hit by the oil crisis, and the countries who had money was Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the Gulf countries. And as the international community did not understand what had happened, and sometimes I think that it is the case. They impose to the Sahelian countries some structural adjustment, and they invest less and less on education and social work. And those organizations funded by Saudi Arabia and some Gulf countries come back to Africa, and they have the second Sahel strategy in the between the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th, and with Islamic NGOs they build school, Islamic school. They found some social work, and the objective was to Islamize the country. Amazing. Islam. Sometimes I say to people in Medina that Islam was in Africa before reaching Medina in the 7th century in Ethiopia, and Timbuktu was Islam was in Timbuktu in the 11th century, or even in Senegal. The thing is, they want to impose the Wahhabi and the Salafi Islam in the Sahel country, and they have the same objective, all this Islamic movement, but they use different strategies. First, you have the strategy of Muslim Brothers. The Muslim Brothers, they name their strategy in Islam. They want to reform Islam, to modernize Islam. The strategy is very complex because they use technological modernity to fight social modernity, and young people are really attracted by this phenomenon. And what they do also is to have a control on schools. For example, in Senegal, in Niger, in Chad, they began the propaganda when you were in secondary school, and at the university they try to have some mosque built by World Muslim League, funded by Saudi Arabia, and they put this mosque the center of indoctrination, yes, voila, of some student. And today, for example, now in Senegal, where we have at least 30 young Senegalese who joined ISIS in Libya and in Syria and in Iraq, and most of them was educated people, and they was trained by those mosques built by the Muslim World League in the campus in Senegal. And one of them is Gassama, who is from Casamance in southern Senegal, was indoctrinated in a mosque built by the Agency of African Muslim, which is founded by Kuwait, the Kuwait. And we have this problem in Africa. And for example, this causes a kind of clash of religious model and causes many conflict between Muslim themselves, as you can see in northern Nigeria. And because Islam was adopted by African people in a peaceful way, without major problem between the communities. But when they come with the Wahhabi and the Salafi Islam, and they try to impose that to people, and they say it is the right Islam. If you are not Salafi, you are a bad Muslim. If you are Sufi, for example, when they arrive in Timbuktu, they destroy the mausoleum, they destroy the what represented the contribution of African Muslim on Islamic civilization. And now, for example, you see the phenomenon of women, girl child and women kamikaze in the Lake Chad basin, in Niger, in Cameroon, in northern Nigeria, and in Chad. They use ideology, because I would like to emphasize on this. Ideology is very important in this process. They use the ideology. They teach to girls that the first martyr in Islam was a girl. Her name was Sumaya, and they teach this in some Islamic school, and they encourage those girls to become plus some girls kidnapped by Boko Haram. And in the Sahel region, I see that before the occupation of northern Mali, we had Mahmoud Diko. In 2009 and 2010, in Mali you have they have a new family code, and it was adopted in the large majority by the parliament, but the president refused to promulgate this family code because of the pressure of the Wahhabi and Salafi organization led by Mahmoud Diko, who is nowadays the president of the High Islamic Council in Mali. And also how they use ideology, because now people are focusing on the northern Mali when you have a very critical problems in the center of Mali and the south. The last attacks in Ivory Coast is caused by some group coming from Mali and from the southern Mali, and mostly some people close to Ahmad Kufa and Ibrahim and Suleiman Keita. And in this case also they use ideology. They say that in the center of Mali we have Segou, Massina, we had in the past some jihadi movement. We have to revival the jihad and Islamize the country. And also, if you look at the strategy of Boko Haram, Boko Haram began with ideology, except the first open letter written by Muhammad Yusuf, open letter to the federal government, say that we are frustrated, we have marginalized, we are suffering from economical condition, and we are socially marginalized. The second writing was entitled هذه عقيدتنا ومنهج دعوتنا. This is our dogma and our way of preaching, which was a book written under Saudi influence, and Muhammad Yusuf learned studies in Medina and was influenced by the Saudi sheikh. And the last book before starting the jihad was Ja al-Haq, the truth is come now. This is the truth, and all people who are not agree with us are bad Muslim, are people to be killed. And in the eschatology of in the psychology of Boko Haram, they think that they base their strategy on a principle. They say that the Prophet Muhammad said that at the end of time you will have, my community will be divided on 73 communities. Just one among these 70 will be saved. And Boko Haram considered itself that they are the saved group. And that's why they kill even Muslim. The saved group is a group practicing Salafi Islam and Wahhabi Islam. Then I think that ideology is really important. And even when we talk about Islamic State, the pretext is always religious, but we cannot neglect the ideological dimension. We have to tackle and to fight extremism with ideology. In Mauritania, they call it fighting ideology by ideology, and they try to promote some sheikh, moderate sheikh, who try. Like my friend Rashad and I don't know, and even for example, they have a lot of money. We have not no money. For example, this I realized this with a foundation in Senegal to show and it was spread in schools and high school how the Saudi money and the Gulf money corrupt people and convince them to change their religion, and how it caused some a clash of model in Senegal, in Mali, in Chad. And the other thing in the strategy, mostly for Muslim brothers, they use the principle of taqiyya. Taqiyya is known in the Shia context, but taqiyya is how you can hide your real agenda, waiting for an opportunity. C'est-à-dire, je sais pas si je peux traduire. C'est-à-dire comment on peut cacher son véritable agenda le temps que le rapport de force devient favorable. Et par exemple, on sait que les Muslim Brothers, they are against democracy, but they can use democracy to access power, and after to be able to fight better democracy, and this taqiyya is used in their strategy. And if we look now very fastly to the profile of some young West African people who joined ISIS, they were very trained people. Gassama was in Dakar University. Jabi, he's a French and Senegalese, and I would like to mention the importance of.
We have to end soon.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And now in Africa, in the Sahel region, we are really concerned about what happened in Libya. Libya is becoming the new land of ISIS, as they have a very big military pressure in Syria, and we're afraid that Libya become the new Afghanistan, I say. And Africa, I think that will be the next field in the near future of ISIS and all this movement like Ansar Sharia. And the final word is how together to think about the way of investing on prevention and fighting this ideology of Wahhabi and Salafi, and also think about how to empower moderate sheikh women. I trust on women, because the women are the victim of extremism, but I think that they are the solution, because they have a long experience on fighting violence, on fighting extremism before extremism becoming a security stake. Then in the continent, in the Sahel, in the Maghreb, the women are trying to organize themselves, and they really need help. Unfortunately, in some countries in Europe and some European organization try to explain that yes, you have these very nice Islamists, they are not very violent, and those people are now taking more and more place in the country, and they control education, they control social work, and in this way they succeed to indoctrinate young people and girls, and some of them are reaching ISIS or other terrorist movement in the region. Thank you very much.
Okay, if you have a question, can you please say your name and where you're from? Okay, so we'll start with the gentleman at the end.
My name is Dominic Dudley. I'm a freelance journalist. There were some reports recently that Islamic State had lost maybe about 22% of its territory in Syria and Iraq since the start of 2015. And I'd just like to ask the panel how that might impact on recruitment and the narrative they put out about being a sort of successful caliphate and all the rest of it, and on the flip side, what impact it might have on the likelihood of attacks overseas. Does it make it more likely that they want to hit out in other places like we saw this morning?
I would like, my English is not so good, I shall try. That's not really a question, I want only to say 2 words.
Can you just say where you're from, please?
Yeah, Parveen Jamil, I am the president of the Kurdish Bureau for Liaison and Information in Brussels. And I lived in Syria, I am born in Syria. I know very good the situation there for long ago. May I say
Yes,
what?
go ahead,
Okay.
please.
I think the problem before the Daesh, it's very, very old. When I was there, the father of Assad was reigning, and now his son. And on the other side of the frontier, Saddam Hussein, the same party, Baas. You know what means Baas? Baas, resurrection of the Arab nationalism. Both of them, and Baas, the Baas of Syria and Iraq, were secularists, were not religious. That's why I think the reason of the Daesh is not only the religion, because the other were not Shiite or Sunnite or I don't know, they were dictators. The problem in this region, or the Middle East, is that there is no deep in the mentalities the notion of democracy, of pluralism. Everybody, laik, secularist, Muslim, not Muslim, atheist, everyone says, it is of me, of you. We can't work together. That's a very big problem, and millions of people are like this. The only, I can say, that it's not relatively prosperous and democratic region is the Kurdistan of Iraq. There is a real government, a real parliament. Sometimes they dispute, as here also sometimes, but it is relatively prosperous. And the only people, almost only, that at the ground fight the ISIS are the Kurds, the Peshmergas. That's what I want.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, please.
I'm Caroline Boulans, I'm a Middle East columnist from the Netherlands. Well, Islamic State is using suicide terrorism both in its military strategy, in its offensives in Syria and Iraq, and of course in terrorism in Europe and elsewhere. How are they able to recruit that many young men, mostly young men and some women, to blow themselves up?
Okay, do we have a last question? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Isabel Montoya from the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
I'm
Isabel Montoya from the Committee on Foreign Affairs at the European Parliament. I'm responsible for Maghreb, counterterrorism, migration, among others. And I would like to thank the 3 speakers for a very interesting presentation and comments. I have a very technical question, and I apologize because I had to leave the room on several occasions. About the, you mentioned interviews or study from foreign returnees, foreign fighters, and I would like to have the reference, please.
Okay, would you like to start, Alexander?
Yeah. Briefly, territory, I'm not sure. In terms of narrative and propaganda, right, nobody's there is reporting the truth. ISIS is not saying, oh my God, we lost, so now we get less recruitment. If you believe, if you're on the ISIS newsletter, you will not hear a lot about defeat and pullback. And if so, it will be strategic and it would be making sense and we will return and all. Maybe it has an impact, but it is a reduction from a huge expansion, right? So it is, in a military sense, it would make even sense because they don't have the personnel to hold a huge territory like this. They don't have the infrastructure like this. So I have a hard time judging the success of ISIS by the territory they hold in the margins. In the center, of course, but not in general. I cannot make the connection. Suicide terrorism, has been ongoing for decades now. It's a good question what motivates people. Some have been diagnosed with mental illnesses, some have been groomed and brainwashed. Like, you can start from Hamas in the Palestinian territories to Al-Qaeda, to there were even Christian militias in Lebanon who used suicide bombers in the 80s. So this is a mindset that people get into, and just recently there was a video from ISIS where an ISIS commander groomed his 14 or 15-year-old son to drive an explosive, with explosive devices filled vehicle into an enemy installation. And the whole video was about how happy he was to do this for his father, for the ideology, for God. So there are many ways, and if you really want to know, we would have to talk to the individuals who make the decision. And there are studies looking into survivors, people who stopped, people who were stopped, but there's really no simple explanation. The study, one was from ICSR, Institute for the Study of ISCR.
It's the International Center for the Studies in Radicalisation.
Absolutely, King's College, and the other one I'm going to look up for you. There are 2 studies available now on this.
Rashad?
Regarding the ISIS territory loss, I think there's 2 things. One is there's been a shrinkage in the centre part of the territory, but it's actually there's been other growth in other areas. Extremism is a growth industry. In Libya, you've had new territories taken. The change in tactics over the last 3 months, though, is very significant. So the change in tactics is they moved away from conventional warfare to, I think what was mentioned about suicide bombing as being an additional form. So what they've done is less conventional tactics and engagement, both in the region, so across Iraq, you've seen a whole range of places where they've started literally just to undertake attacks, and in Syria, places which they've lost territory like Al Abiyad, actually they've just undertaken a whole spray of suicide bombing attacks in different areas. And that's also increased in number. So over the last 3 months we've seen literal, it's doubled almost. So it's become a tactic because they can no longer hold territory. From our perspective, I think I was asked this question a few days ago, though, what does this mean? What does this mean, especially given the arrest with Saleh Abdus Salam? I think it's fairly, many people are now saying, immediately that actually they had planned attacks already, and maybe what we're seeing today is some of those attacks brought forward. This is, and I think that's a fairly reasonable analysis without knowing any of the details. I think that's probably what people are suggesting. And I think, to be fair, without wanting to sound all doom and gloom, I think it probably is the case that now there will be a greater emphasis on broader attacks across the globe. That would be my feeling based upon what's happened. With regards to the other questions, the Assad and Ba'ath, there's a lot of truth to say that there's a dynamic that is different to the West in the Middle East and the countries, that actually there are different reasons why people in the West, individuals, may be attracted to extremist ideology to why people within Middle Eastern countries are attracted to the ideology. There are different factors. And it's true, Hafiz Assad, we know, was an awful tyrant and a brutal dictator. And we know this kind of symbiosis with Islamists existed back then. When the Muslim Brotherhood tried to take Hama, Hafiz Assad had no qualm with blitzing it to the ground and just killing off 30,000 people, at least. And then literally rebuilding over it. It's eerie. They literally rebuilt over Hama, and you can walk through, and it's that whole region. And so there is some truth to that. But there's also some other things that happen in the build-up for ISIS. So there's a great book I'd recommend anybody who's really interested in the subject, and there's a re-edition being published again. It's Hassan and Michael Weiss's work, ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. And they mention a number of things that are very, very important. First of all, the circumstances for generating these types of individuals post-war. There were very particular circumstances, policy measures that were mistaken that created this. Among them were the fact that there was a vacuum created by the disbanding of the Ba'athist military in a complete way. The Ba'athist military, pre that, Saddam Hussein had decided that what he wanted to do was take up an Islamic perspective. So not only did you see the Islamization of the Ba'athist military, you saw that with senior individuals becoming Islamized, Salafized. So you had the coming together, and we've seen this historically, of Ba'athist ideology with with Puritan extreme forms of Salafi and Islamist ideology. And so Ba'athist ideology is what? It's Arab National Socialism, i.e. Arab Nazism. That's the type of ideology you're talking about. And so it has all the characteristics of totalitarian. It has all the characteristics of just, anti-Semitic belief system. It has, Michel Aflaq, one of the founding thinkers, was also the same guy that translated Mein Kampf into Arabic as Kifahi, My Struggle. So this is the origins of this. And so when you bring it together with Islamist ideology and this puritanical mindset of right and wrong, the only way forward, the only true form of Islam, and you have all those other things, you get this very nasty regime being created. So when the expansion took place, you saw the creation of the fruits of the Islamic State of Iraq, which is what it was initially called. And so the Islamic State of Iraq eventually then went on to become the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and so on. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think it is important to see the history and the development, not because we need to excuse it, but we need to understand what are the factors that influence it and make it up.
I would also recommend that book because I read it as well.
And there's a second edition coming out with an extra 170 pages or something, which will be really interesting to see. The returnees, there's a lot now that we've actually, there's the studies that have been done, but also there's a lot more that have come into the security services and the authorities. So for some of us who work in this space, so I was mentioned that I work in counter-terrorism, so I've worked on interventions with people who have returned back from these areas, people who have been convicted, people who have been arrested, and so there's a whole range. So we've got more of an idea now of the push-pull factors, as well as the kind of interaction we have with the people in Raqqa from Sudan, as an example. So we have a lot of the information and looking at what their push-pull factors are, what their motivations are. And they do clearly specify certain things. They speak of all the things you mentioned, actually. The religious duty to create this new Islamic state. The living under Islamic governance. Saudi Arabia wasn't really Islamic enough. Someone who's lived in Saudi Arabia, it's always amusing hearing people say stuff like this. But actually, this is, it's the same puritanical religious ideology, but there's something distinct from it. And that is the political ideology. And this is where they differ from. Saudi Arabia is, in terms of, as a political ally, it doesn't have a political foreign policy agenda which is not unmalleable to our interests in the region, which is why we've had a historic kind of connection with them. Vivi Israel as an example. This has always been important. They've always pushed for an agenda and so on. So this is different now, because what you have is this puritanical ideology in terms of religion, coupled with the brotherhood mindset of Islamism, coupled with a very kind of, and add to that the region and the surrounding tyranny, the surrounding oppression, and what's going on, and you have a very, very powerful set of political motives, ideological, puritanical ideas, and religious bonding. Because the religious bonding, fine, I'm not saying this is Islam, obviously I don't believe that, but obviously most Muslims don't believe that, but you can't negate for them this is a religious bonding that takes place. The way they see this, what you mentioned, that they find citations either from scripture or from history, or if they need to violate it, they have a justification. So they have a book which is called The Management of Savagery, which they've adopted as their framework of thinking about guerrilla tactics in warfare, where they say, yeah, fine, it may disagree with Islamic rules of fighting, but this warfare now is universal, it doesn't matter. Guerrilla warfare has its own sets of rules and everybody must embrace it, and it's become internalized. So it's internalized in their own mindset. This is part of their religious, ideological, political worldview. And so when you see that as a pull factor again, the adventure, you see kids driving a tank, spinning it around like they're in some computer game. That element is there very much for Western attraction. There's all sorts of additional things that come into play. And I think if we want to have a counter-narrative or counter-narratives, we actually need to look at what are the pull factors for different groups of people, because there are different things that attract different people. And then allow the narratives to address each of those things. Not one, there's no one magical one we're going to, think, what is it? Think again and turn away. It's not going to magically change, the propaganda space. We actually do need to step back and look at this in a very sophisticated way, which means understanding the narratives, understanding the push-pull factors, what has worked for who, and then deploying counter-narratives accordingly, so that we develop in a very specific manner.
Okay.
Sorry. Can I just ask a follow-up question to what Rashad just said? Rashad, I'm Roberto Bonazzi, but you say we have to understand the narrative in order to build the counter-narrative, analyze the push and pull factors. Has it not been done? I mean, that's a theory of what should be done, but we've heard this for the past 2-3 years.
So on this, there's lots of kind of research work, which, to be fair, is good work, is fairly on target in terms of understanding the psychological factors, some of the demographic factors, some of the ideological analysis. It is good. However, to be completely honest, when looking at it in the grand scale, because we're talking now about assessing narratives, online engagement, and so on, one of the things that we're looking at is being able to then map the online space in terms of narratives, so that we have a data set which is actually fairly substantial to justify what people's theoretical frameworks is. So we're developing testing frameworks to look at mass data and the theoretical frameworks to say, well, this is the ideas, if you like, that people say radicalisation happens like this. These are the narratives, they can map onto radicalisation. This is the data sets we have on the online space in terms of, for example, we have mass Twitter accounts of many of these people. We have narrative propaganda that ISIS has put out. We can map those two things to determine, how actually the narrative space functions, and then we can source counter-narrative and look at how that works in that space. It is being done, but it hasn't been done at that systematic level properly.
I guess it's a huge work, it's amazing work that is being done, but we'll always be late, because by the time we've understood what the message was, they've already something else.
So we need something reactive in that sense.
So maybe it's not just about counter-narrative, or I don't know, no. It's just
I think there's probably a number of things. I think first of all, there's a counter-narrative side which is almost remedial and reactive. We're looking at issues, we're tackling issues as they change, as they shift, as they arise. There's a broader question about narrowing that space. So the tactics of terrorism generally, the grey zone, actually they do speak about this in a lot of detail, that they want to narrow the grey zone so that which side you can belong to is very, very clear, which is another reason why we need to think about this in the ideological sense. That, hold on a second, we need to maintain our value system that is inclusive, because we have developed that over centuries. And so that becomes really important as well, that we want to narrow the recruitment zone. And so in that sense, the counter-narrative has to have a very, very not just negative, but very, very clear sets of values about pluralism, about democracy. And actually, in that sense, where people can see why they maintain their Islamic identity, their European identity, their whatever ethnic identity they have, and we have a society which is able to manage that. So that's a big issue we need to think about.
Okay. Saudi Arabia is now evaluating in a very complex situation. The political wing of the Saudi in Saudi Arabia is now against terrorism, Salafism, and Wahhabism. And for example, next week, Saudi Arabia with the World Muslim League organized a conference in Dakar in how to tackle terrorism and extremism. And the political, because now you have ISIS, and it is very dangerous for all people, including the Saudi monarchy. And the religious wing of the Saudi power now is really complex. It have a very complex idea when they talk about terrorism. For example, they organized a conference in Dakar and in Niamey about the concept of jihad. They say this. They said they did not say jihad is not part of Islam is problem. They say that jihad from now actually it is not currently we cannot do any jihad because the condition of jihad are not jihad is not possible in this condition now. They say that all these things are not real jihad, but they never condemn jihad properly. It is and the other thing is I would like to talk about the I don't know how to say in English, incoherence, yes, the inconsistency, yes, of some European and Western government. When they come in Senegal, in the Sahel, many meetings, they say, okay, be careful, the Saudi money and the Qatari money is not good. They want to import or export ideology. And in the meantime, they sell Rafale and Paris Saint-Germain to Qatar. And I mean, democracy have to be credible. If people, this kind of inconsistency used by the Islamist narrative to say that, look, this is democracy, this is liberalism, this is freedom, and we are suffering from this inconsistency. And I would like to call to some coherence with our European partners in order to help us together to tackle this phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add something about the consistency issue and a question to Bakari, because we also need to cooperate with different actors in the region, and we like it or not, for example, Turkey is one of those partners. But we had an issue last week, for example, in the middle of Brussels, next to the council in that building. There was a tent of PKK during 1 week, just next to council, 100 meters from the European Parliament, while PKK is indeed killing civilians in Turkey. So there are no good terrorists and bad terrorists, and if you would like to cooperate with certain countries, then we need to be consistent in that sense too. What do you think?
Do we have any other questions? I'll just take the last round.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Arturo Varvelli, ISPI Senior Research Fellow. I have two comments. The first one is about Libya. I am an expert about Libya. In Libya, Sirte in particular, the background of the rise of ISIS is, in my view, quite similar to its rise in Iraq. Although Libya is not characterized by the same deep-root sectarianism. It's not a coincidence that IS has expanded its activities in Sirte. That is the hometown of Gaddafi. Since his fall, the Gaddafi tribe has been marginalized by the various Tripoli government and central authorities. And so I think that the problem is not an ideological problem. There is not a radicalization by ideological drivers, but by political reason, I think. And the second one is about the, if you look at the global map of terrorist organizations and the map of failing state, failed state, or states without full control of their territories, you can see that the two maps are overlapping, are the same, which is the relations, which is the relation. And I think that is important to rebuild the states, or try to rebuild the states, on the basis of inclusiveness and pluralism. So sure, it's a long-term goal, but we have not to forget the long-term goal by the political of day by day.
Martin Banks, I'm a Brussels-based journalist. Can I just ask Mr. Ali to expand a little bit on his comment about he thinks there'll be a greater emphasis on broader attacks around the world? Just a bit of explanation.
Okay, we'll respond to these questions then. I don't know, Bakari, do you want to start this time?
Okay, about Libya, for example, yes, it is a political problem after the political crisis, major in Libya, and the competition between tribes. Okay, but what is dangerous in the situation in Libya now, currently is, you have Chad, Niger, and you have Nigeria, and in Africa, in the Sahel region, our government, our civil society are really concerned about Libya, and because our young people who want to reach ISIS, Syria is so far, they go to Libya. And the other thing, I think that in Europe, you have to keep in mind is that among the objective to settle in Libya, according to ISIS, is to reach Europe or to hit Europe from Libya. And I think that perhaps here people have time to be in philosophy to think about, but in Africa, in the neighboring country, I was in Chad, in Niger, people are really concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Libya actually, there's a few very quick points. First of all, we tend to be a little bit behind on some of this stuff. We wait for things to get worse and then react, and this is the point you're making, and it's the same with our international policy. Actually, the situation in Libya has been getting worse for some time, and also across different parts of the region. But at the same time, I'm more concerned about some of the policy development attitudes towards the region. So for example, yes, we know what has happened in Libya, but that is not due to the intervention that took place to remove Gaddafi. There's still some of this stuff of thinking around with people. No, we had to intervene to stop Gaddafi slaughtering those people. And that was correct. It's the post-intervention planning, policy and actions that have come to undo that, when we leave a political vacuum and a vacuum in the region, which is what we're seeing now. When that political vacuum is left, then it's naturally a place for strong strategic powers to come in. And so we've seen it in two ways: the rise of extremist ideology like ISIS, and we've seen it with Russia and Syria. That's exactly what's happened. And I think we need to think about this on a broader level, that strategically speaking, how do we move forward? Because intervention, fine, we learned the lesson from some of the mistakes in Iraq, but it wasn't the military side that was problematic in Iraq. That was very short, very succinct. It was the post-military governance that failed. Similarly, we learned the successes of intervention in Kosovo, in Bosnia, where if you go to these places, you know, in the UK, Tony Blair is not the most popular person now, given everything that's happened. But, you know, Bill Clinton and Tony Blair are popular names for children in Kosovo and certain villages in Croatia, etc., because these were people that saved lives. And so we need to step back and have a very serious conversation about how and what we do in that respect. With regards to the kind of extension, I do think, what I mean is twofold. I think that the networks have spread much further out in Europe than we would like to acknowledge and admit. And so what we are seeing now in Belgium, and Belgium is not unique and is not on its own in that respect, is actually the effects of those networks being settled fairly well in various places within Brussels, etc. So I think as a result of that, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, where there have been hints of attacks before, whether it's Brussels or whether it's London or whether it's like what happened in Tunis, I think actually we are going to see more of those types of attacks, because actually there's very little you can do from a policing perspective to stop individuals. What you can do is you can work and find networks. And so this is why the point regarding our intelligence services, sharing intelligence, being able to actually follow up leads, because the French actually determined that there was a number of, you know, from the reports that were leaked, there was a number of individuals that were already here. They already knew that Belgium had a number of individuals that were orchestrating the attacks. So in that regard, if we are looking for networks and we are looking for people, I think that's quite key if we're going to stop further attacks of this nature, as much as they can be stopped.
Okay,
I'm good.
okay, do we have one last question? Okay, then I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. I'd like to thank you all for coming here under very difficult circumstances and give us really great presentations on a theme that's obviously of high concern, and we'll continue to be working on it within this project for the entirety of this year.